stop the ship? Let's see. Those fueling protocols got some thick ice, but nothing I can't handle. Oops. Looks like I overdid it a bit. That fuel type is pretty volatile. Anyway, the ship is stranded. Enjoy.
Game over, yeah!
So, Cyberpunk 2077 came and went and it was kind of a disaster, but I'm not here to talk about bugs today. Okay, full disclosure, I'm going to talk about something related to bugs and performance today, and also you should get ready to get the genre Cyberpunk and the game Cyberpunk confused a lot, but right now I want to talk about aesthetic. When the first trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 came out, it looked one way, and when the gameplay was finally revealed, it looked another way. And some people weren't happy, and that's due to the Cyberpunk's genre association with darkness and rain and just dreary weather in general, and Cyberpunk, well, it looked bright and sunny. Of course, saying that a game isn't Cyberpunk just because it has the sun is ridiculous. Just look at one of my favorite Cyberpunk franchises of all time, Ghost in the Shell. Are you going to tell me that isn't Cyberpunk? But while Cyberpunk is about themes and warnings of the possibility of living in a future that is high-tech, low-life, in less abstract terms, less philosophical terms like that, it is undeniable that it has obtained a bit of an uniform aesthetic over time. What I'm trying to say is, when someone asks you to think of Cyberpunk, you are more likely to think of a setting that looks like Blade Runner than a setting that looks like, say, Star Wars. To fans of classic Cyberpunk though, I'm happy to announce it didn't take long at all for a game like that to be released. Enter the Ascent, a game that breathes, drinks, eats, and hugs Cyberpunk in the most traditional, cliched way possible, and I mean that in a good way. All you need is a single look at the game to see where it draws its inspirations from, but beyond the superficial, the Ascent also brings to the table a story and setting that is truly Cyberpunk, and as a plus, you can actually ride the subway. Cyberpunk 2077, eat your heart out. The premise of this game drew me to it right from the start. It is the sort of thing that only hilariously hyper-capitalistic dark futures can bring. The plot takes place on the planet of Valles, where the only way to enter, assuming you're not already super rich, is to literally sell your life to a corporation that will bring you there to work under them as an ident, as in indentured servitude, as in a slave, where you have to work really hard in the hopes of someday, maybe but probably not, pay off your debt so you can be free again. The corporations of Valles are so highly advanced that they no longer can manage themselves using only old-fashioned brainpower, so instead they started building highly sophisticated artificial intelligences called AGIs to manage their companies. You build your own character from scratch in a character creator that is mostly okay, I guess, in terms of options, and then you go to work as an ident for the Ascent group. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, it doesn't take long before the Ascent group's AGI goes dark, essentially bankrupting the company. And in Valles, there is no government. Anything and everything is left at the whims of the corporations. So, without the Ascent group to manage it anymore, the arcology where its workers lived is now left in pure chaos, filled with dangerous gangs trying to rise and take control of it, while rival corporations move in with elite teams of specialized mercenaries trying to grab all of the property they can before everything collapses. And it's now up to you, and up to 3 other buddies in co-op if you have them, to essentially survive the madness. The premise is fantastic, but unfortunately the story itself ends up being kind of irrelevant. It's not like the story itself is bad, it does try to present itself through cutscenes that keep escalating plot twists and introducing fascinating concepts, but at the end of the day, they're just concepts. There aren't many characters you talk to during the campaign, but the ones you do are mostly cliche cardboard cutouts of the morally dubious variety that just boss you around from mission to mission, either being completely unrelatable or not spending enough time with you for you to really get invested into them. Props to the AI that works with you throughout the game though for being the best character. They are one of the few characters in existence that manage to walk the tight line between being quirky and charming. They are very straightforward in informing you of your objectives, but the further you get into the game, the more they make related but still weird commentaries about how much they like murder and how in awe they are of superior intelligences. Shit's surprisingly cute considering how dark the subject matter is, though I'm not sure if having the most known character thing in the entire game be the most charming character is a good mark or a bad mark on the game overall. Where the Ascent excels though is in its setting. Lore-wise, it's pretty damn cool, but it really excels even more from a purely visual perspective. It's not only damn good looking, it also has a clear visual direction, which is to basically just stack as much technological and broken shit as humanly possible everywhere. And if that's not Cyberpunk, I don't know what that is. Seriously though, someone unlocked the camera using an Unreal Engine mod and walked through the city in first person, and the details look just as good up close as they do from the top-down isometric perspective the game actually uses, which means an insane amount of work was put into getting it to look this way, and let me tell you, it paid off. It just looks gorgeous. From the very bottom of the sewers you start into the alleyways and the sequences of staircases followed by even more staircases and incredibly vertical level design of the lowest levels, to the more reasonable but still multi-layered walkways of the high streets and even through clean sterile labs, the game looks amazing and on point. And there's nothing quite like crossing a bridge in the rain while the camera pans to highlight the neon signs stuck to its side, to show how atmospheric this game can really get. And changing the camera angles to whatever fits the current situation best is a trick this game loves to pull, aiming for maximum setting immersion. And it's not just the environments though, every character just looks like they belong in a cyberpunk world. The further I got into the game, the more the pieces of gear I equipped looked impractical but awesome. And if you upgrade your skills enough, you even get cyborg implants bolted straight into your body as you become a full chrome, which is in-universe slang for a person that got a lot of cybernetic augmentations, I guess. It's hard to believe people in the future would really dress like this, quite this impractically, but it does bring to mind the same high-tech low-life creed that I talked about a while ago, you know, a few sentences back. And it does that with a single glance at the character design, which is why I absolutely just love the world design, the character design, and every design this game brings to the table. Unfortunately, the graphics come at the price of the game being crazy resource intensive when it comes to ray tracing. I don't know if it's because of my rig or because of poor optimization, but considering I'm running the game only at 1080p, you'd expect it to at least hit 60 frames per second, but alas, it couldn't even keep it at 6 frames per second. Even turning on DLSS didn't have a noticeable effect at all, but I had decided to take the hit since I paid for the whole graphics card, so I'm gonna use the whole damn graphics card. At least until the game crashed and I lost half an hour of footage, while an error log clearly displayed that the cause was the ray tracing. Somehow. At that point, I just gave up and ran the game with RTX off, which looks just as gorgeous honestly, and it boosted the FPS to 120. So you know, take this as a warning if you really want to use ray tracing in this game, it is crazy intensive. Graphics aside though, it is now time to talk about the meat and potatoes of the Ascent, the gameplay. Combat is done twin-stick shooter style, with the ability to switch between two guns and use two abilities as well as a tactical ability that works like a grenade. You can dodge as well as hold a button to aim higher. This is useful because elevation plays a part in certain environments, allowing you to hit enemies that are placed higher than you, but most of the time you instead use it while crouching, since you can crouch behind chest-high walls and other obstacles for cover. Where it gets interesting though is when we get to talk about all of the stuff related to the combat but not the combat directly. In a way, I sense some inspiration from both Diablo and a bit of Dark Souls as well. From Diablo you get the isometric perspective, obviously, but you also get a health bar and an energy bar that works just like a mana bar, cooldown on skills, as well as champion/name enemies with special skills that make them tougher than the normal version of their enemy type. The difference here being that the Ascent puts a very cyberpunk spin on it. Named enemies are called bounties, and once defeated, you can pick up a proof you killed them and bring it to a bartender to claim the bounty in order to get some cash. The way loot drops work, however, reminds me a lot more of games like Dark Souls, because unlike in Diablo, each enemy doesn't drop a dozen gear items with randomized stats, and yes, that's an exaggeration, please don't destroy me, Diablo fans. Instead, the loot drops are much more infrequent, and each instance of a weapon has the exact same stats as every other instance of the same weapon. Meaning if you got a super cool pistol from an enemy and another super cool pistol much later in the game, they will both share the same stats. There are also unique instances of weapons that show up only once in the entire game, and if you sequence break the game, you can run into an area filled with high level enemies, grab a super powerful gun, and then just die, since just like in Dark Souls, dying doesn't result in you losing any of your items. I used that trick to get the Overwhelmer, an incredibly powerful assault rifle that sets enemies on fire right at the start of the game, which is a pretty neat trick that shows just how open-ended the open world game of the Ascent really is. Oh, and upgrading weapons work just like in Dark Souls as well. You give the gunsmith a generic upgrade material, and after enough upgrades, you need a higher tier of upgrade material to keep upgrading it. This allows you to carry the weapons you find from the beginning of the game all the way to the end of the game if you like them. The way leveling up works is where things start to diverge from the usual inspirations. Instead of being able to directly level up your stats, you instead get 3 points to distribute between 8 different passive abilities, with a pair of abilities related to each stat. And if you put points into an ability, the stat associated with that passive also raises, which will affect things like your active skills. For example, my favorite skills come the end of the game were summoning 2 different types of robots to help. However, they died or ran out of summon time extremely quickly because the stat associated with those robots was cybernetics, and I had put exactly 0 points into any of the passive cybernetic skills, so obviously they were weak as shit and unfit for the endgame. Also, I was a dumbass to not do that, since your tactical charge does not recharge as you damage enemies if you don't put at least a single point in your tactical charge ability. God damn it. When it comes to gear, you get to pick 2 weapons to bring with you, as well as 3 pieces of armor, head, torso, and legs. You also get to pick the 2 active abilities you can use, as well as 2 passive abilities, and finally a tactical charge. There's a lot of stuff for you to pick, but honestly it all feels like it is in service to try to cover up for a very big problem with the Ascent, that there are no classes. Now, that's not to say every game needs classes, just look at Dark Souls. The class you pick at the beginning of the game, they are more like suggestions than set into stone, but Dark Souls had a crazy amount of spells and weapons that work differently. The Ascent skill variety is decent, but ultimately it's too easy to get a hold of every single one of them, and you can easily switch them between battles at the cost of some energy, meaning you can try every single possible way and set of skills in a single playthrough. The weapons don't fare too much better, they aren't as varied as I'd like, with some weapon types only having 2 single weapons in the entire game that just aren't as good as just picking up an assault rifle, and trying different weapons ends up being punished by the low number of weapon upgrade materials that you can find. So ultimately I ended up running the entire game with the Overwhelmer and another weapon that fired a giant lightning stream, and yet both of them felt functionally the same. Even equipping a shotgun and a giant minigun felt just a bit different from the usual dodge and shoot gameplay that I had been experienced up to that point. Not because I stopped dodging and shooting, just because the bullets did a thing a little bit differently. And that's not a problem with the combat itself though. The gameplay and the combat is still very good, but that does lower the replayability factor of the game a little bit, and it does make a lot of the decisions made up on the level up screen feel a bit more superficial. They are not superficial, like I explained before, but the fact remains that no matter what points I dumped in which passive ability, the gameplay largely remains the same. Just run and shoot, with the occasional side mission grind to get some XP or credits. And while we are talking about this, the side mission design in this game is utterly baffling. One of the very first side missions you can acquire says it's a level 2 mission, yet on the path to where you need to go you suddenly come across level 9 and level 10 enemies that can just tear you like wet paper, and yet even if you manage to go through them, the place you actually need to go is only unlocked after you completed a few more story quests. So yeah, what the hell is up with that? And while those could be big problems depending on what you want out of this game, it definitely does not have the replayability of Diablo. At the end of the day, the combat still feels viscerally satisfying. Viscerally here being a word that means that the guns feel good to shoot and the enemies explode into red goo when you shoot at them. And it's not like it is completely brain dead either. The reason I hunted down the other energy gun is because when I was about halfway through the game, it started throwing robotic enemies at me, and the effectiveness of the Overwhelmer is dramatically lowered against robotic enemies since its element is fire, which works best against organic enemies. So, you know, I needed to find a weapon to use against the robots. Which is pretty cool that the game gets you to think about what kind of arsenal you're going to bring with you. And also, the game warns you when you're about to sell your last piece of a specific gear, be it weapon or armor, which is nice, you know, in case you need to switch to something else, assuming of course that you have enough, you know, upgrade materials to get that weapon to a decent level, depending on the part of the game you are in. But let's not get into that too much. It still is a very good game. I enjoyed it. Ultimately, the Ascent isn't going to set the world on fire, but if you got a Cyberpunk itch to scratch, it will do. Hell, even if you don't have one, maybe you just want to shoot some stuff or have some co-op fun, it'll work for that as well. It is a very good game, a great game that took me 10 hours to play through, and even if I'm not going back immediately into it, I still think those 10 hours were 10 hours well spent. Anyway, please remember to like